Wednesday, and you know what that means. Welcome to If
These Walls Could Talk.
Yay! I'm one of your hosts, Wendy Stuart,
and I am Tim Moss. Hi.
It's so great to have you here with us today. Tim, how have you been? It's great to have him back. As you all know,
I'm in person.
He's been hither, zither, and yonder, right?
I'm back in New York City for another week or two, and then I head out again.
And we got to get him while he's here. You know, you got to hook him in.
Yeah, I've been Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Chicago, Indiana. We were in Asheville, North Carolina a couple months ago.
Amazing.
Boise, Idaho, Las Vegas, and Fort Lauderdale, Florida, doing my cabaret show and Lube and 50 Shades of Gay and all kinds of shows.
So. And while Tim was gone, I was hosting over at the Copacabana in New York.
Yes.
We did two really incredible nights. We did a fashion night, and then my all-time favorite was Night of 1,000 Marilyns, where everybody came looking like a Marilyn.
There was a lot of Marilyns.
There were a lot of Marilyns. I don't think we hit 1,000, but there were people that were Marilyn in their minds. No, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like, don't we all some days we wake up and we feel just like Marilyn, right?
Yes, we're just two little girls from Little Rock.
So I am. You know what I did on Sunday?
Yes.
I am in Pennsylvania some weekends, and I gave a fabulous party. I had 85 people, and I was able to do it indoor and outdoor, which made everybody feel okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so much fun. People are definitely getting more relaxed. Fingers crossed that as we go into the fall, that numbers stay down. And it's just so great to be able to celebrate your friends and your life.
Yes.
And I put in a frog pond in the house this year. I had 13 frogs. I have a thing for frogs.
Really?
Yes, I have 13.
Out back?
I did.
Nice,
yeah.
Nice.
I have 11 koi, but I had 13 frogs that I could count. There is one that does have a crush on me. I know you're thinking I'm crazy, but no, he looks at me and he goes, rip, rip, rip. And I talk back to him. We kind of like, we have this thing going.
He could be your prince.
Oh, and a shout out this Saturday, I'll be emceeing the Henna Q Dance Company's.
Oh, I love Henna Q.
I know you do.
Yes.
Is there any chance you can come?
Next weekend?
It's this Saturday night.
No, I can't this weekend. I'm performing in Apollonia Cruises.
Right. It's the same day. Right, which I would have been there.
The Bronx Academy of Arts and Dance.
You're going to be at the Bronx Academy of Arts and Dance. And bless Apollonia Cruz for everything she does through the community. I will be in Pennsylvania. Hannah Q also. We love people that raise up their community.
Absolutely.
Hannah single-handedly built, well, with her amazing husband, Max, a stage in the woods, and has been not only entertaining us with her incredible dancers, and upcoming, I'll be talking about her show she's having right here in New York City at the Abrams Art Center. But she also serves delicious food, so you can come see a show, have dinner, and celebrate the beautiful world of dance and culture. Because culture is really what it's all about at the end of the day. That's what's going to bring everybody together.
Absolutely.
That's how I feel. And speaking of which, oh my God, this perfect segue.
Well, you might wonder why we're so far away today.
So far away.
Because we've got two guests that are going to be joining us.
We do. We like, and you know what? If you could see our little setup here, how we just squeeze everybody in front.
It's very friendly.
Because this is the magic world of streaming. You would think they would have, like, I don't know, an expandable eye. Oh my God, we'll make a fortune, Tim. We'll come up with it. We'll patent the expandable eye. But without further ado, I love saying that, we have two guests today. Liz Thompson, who is co-creator of this amazing Village Trip Festival, September 10th through the 24th. They've got lecturers, they've got speakers, they've got musical performances, they've got walking tours. And of course, you can't talk about New York without speaking about our featured historian of New York, Robert Snyder. So please come on in.
Welcome. Liz Thompson and Robert Snyder.
Yep. So we just slide. We all we slide. It's very cozy here.
Hi.
There we all are. Isn't this cute? Look where that's us.
Yeah.
Hi. It's great, right?
Nice to be here.
It's really great to be here. I'm over. Okay, are we all in?
Perfect. Yes.
Yay, everybody!
Everyone
Everyone can see us clearly. Well, first of all, welcome. Very excited to have you here.
Thank you
And
for
also
having
the
us.
festival starts this weekend, and you have
Yep.
taken time out to
Okay.
come and sit with
It's
us. We
amazing.
appreciate that very
Well,
much.
it's very nice to be here talking about it. You were there last night, so you know we had a little
Yes.
pre-launch. We had
Yeah.
our first art show, and you came to the party.
And that was it. What is the name of the gallery at St. John's
the
Historical
Revelation
Church?
Gallery in St. John's in the Village, which is at Waverley and 11th.
It was
Mhm.
Revelation Gallery. I
That's
almost
right,
called
yeah.
it the Resurrection Gallery because it was in a
Yes.
church. I don't know. But the turnout was amazing. And one of the things I noticed that it was all like people from the village. It's the
Yeah.
New Yorkers,
Yeah.
the artists,
Yeah.
the people that support the arts here.
It was great. Yeah, I mean, Mark Kehoe, who curated it,
Yes.
I mean, it was essentially village artists, and it was great to have everyone there, and then various other guests like yourselves who came along. And
Well, thank you.
and it was
And
fun
I'd
too.
like
Oh,
to
it
tell
was.
people, how long will the show be up for? A month, right?
It's up, yes, a month. It's
Okay,
August, yes.
and a lot of the pieces on the wall, both photography and paintings, they depict New York, which is really, really
Yeah,
good.
and many are for sale.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and many are for sale. So that
If you wish to add to your collections.
absolutely.
And people can find out more about it at thevillagetrip.org. Is that correct?
www.thevillagetrip.com.
.com.
.com.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Right, the village, and Trip has only one P. As I so found out, I kept writing down TRIPP. Where did I get that from? Why did I think it was a double P? I know why, because your name doesn't have a P in
Oh,
it.
you put it in Trip instead of
Right. There you go. You know those P's that float around.
You
I'm
were
just
sprinkling
kidding.
like some salt and pepper or whatever was around. Yeah,
P.
yeah. everyone gets it.
Robert, very excited. You're a historian of New York. My God, you must have stories to tell.
I am by appointment the Manhattan Borough historian,
The Manhattan Borough
Wow.
historian,
Wow.
official.
and I have long been fascinated by the history of New York City, and I've really dedicated my career to writing and speaking with the general public about the history of our city and why it
Mhm.
matters so much.
Right, and why it matters so much.
Well,
So,
New York City is it's so unique
right.
and so original. And there's
Nothing
no
like
place
it.
like it. That's why it's so fascinating.
Right. It is an interesting combination of the two of you because Robert, of course, is a native New Yorker by way of being born here, but then growing up in New Jersey. Liz is what I call a New Yorkophile. You fell in love with this.
Yeah.
You fell in love with this city and Joan Baez. Was that
I
your?
did, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, when I grew up in North London, where I still live, unfortunately. I mean, I live in a very nice place, but I'd rather live in the village, you know.
I just love. I love this.
My sister gave me a baby guitar, first of all, then a bigger guitar in the fag end of the 60s. And I was about 11, needed to learn to play it. And I found a Joan Baez record in her collection. And she had no memory of ever having bought it. So I put it on the turntable. And they're really quite easy, 3, 4, 5 chords. I could do that. So, and then of course I had to find another record to learn. You know, I was playing piano already. I had to find another record to learn more songs.
So you're self-taught.
Yeah, well, I went for guitar and singing so far as I sing.
Self-taught.
So I kind of read, you read all the, in those analog days. Do you
Mhm.
remember? You read the sleeve notes and you went to the library.
Yeah.
You got another record and you get the book. And it
Yeah.
told you
The sleeve
so,
notes.
I went from Baez to Dylan to Judy Collins to Woody Guthrie. And then, I'd read
Wow.
something like, Dylan and Baez performed at the March on Washington. And I'm about any minute I'm going to be 65.
Mhm.
But it was kind of very recent history, and I sort of knew what it was dimly, but I was 10 or whatever. So I looked all this up, and then that's really interesting. Then the civil rights. So I followed. So Baez was kind of a Venn diagram through which I explored lots of
Mhm.
stuff. That was, I suppose, the second half of 1960s, 50s, 60s American history. So I became very enmeshed in it without having set foot there. Because you remember the 60s and 70s, we didn't have cheap air travel.
Yeah,
yet.
right.
So
Right.
it seemed very remote. I thought, well, one day I'll go.
But you were also experiencing that in real time, like as Baez and Dylan and all of that.
Yeah,
you
fact,
were following
yeah.
that.
They'd kind of left the village by then, because we're talking
Mhm.
69, 70. And I was sort of hearing, I didn't know what Greenwich Village looked like. But my dad then, when I got into it, he said, oh, yeah, I was there during the war, hanging out at the Village Vanguard in Nick's.
The
Oh.
Village Vanguard. Your dad
So,
during
yeah.
the war.
Yeah, he was a sailor on, like on the town,
It is interesting, Liz, because the time period you're talking about, I remember so well, and the Beatles were such a big thing,
Yeah.
especially where
Which is
you
from
were, and
England.
yet
And my sister was, sadly was. She died. She died just as my book on Joan Baez came out, which is
Oh,
really
goodness.
sad.
I'm so sorry. Oh,
Very sadly. But she was a little older than me, and she was exactly the right age for the Beatles. And our mother was from Liverpool.
Okay,
Oh,
Al.
okay.
So we were, so when they, Shea Stadium or whatever, I was allowed to stay up and watch. So I remember all that. My mother was, oh, they're great boys, she saw them live. I mean,
Oh my gosh.
London Palladium, the night before.
The London
So I grew up
Palladium.
with all
Guess
that,
what? I
yes.
have that poster.
Do you?
Yeah, I absolutely do. My
Yeah,
sister brought
yeah.
it home to me. So while you were worshiping Joan Baez, I had a Beatle doll. I had the Beatle poster.
Yeah.
I knew of the other. This is so interesting to me because you had such an affinity, a passion,
Yeah.
but it's got to be coming from somewhere else.
Well, I just love, I love music, and I did a conventional music degree. Wasn't a very good student because I didn't practice. I was supposed to be good. But I love music, and I love the way music and the sort of social action and the social context of music, which of course is very much what this. I mean, the Festival of New York started as a music idea, but I love the way music and social activism interact here. But I love music. I love the Beatles still. Wish I'd seen them live, but I was allowed to stay up and watch them at the Palladium. I was 5, I think. Because Maureen was there. So music. I mean, music is very important. It's a soundtrack.
Absolutely.
Right? You hear it. Like a. I don't have much of a sense of smell, so smell doesn't necessarily take me back anywhere. But you hear a song and you know where you were when you heard it, and
Right.
what you were
remember
doing.
what-
I was a student then, or I was whatever. And I'm
Yep.
sure you've got
Yeah, absolutely.
the soundtrack to your life, Rob.
The soundtrack to your life.
But firstly, thank you everyone for tuning in. You're watching If These Walls Could Talk with your hosts, Wendy Stuart and Tim Moss, and our wonderful and incredible guests, Liz Thompson and Robert Snyder. And we will be right back. Okay, so now that was our commercial break.
Station identification.
It's very quick.
So, Robert, you grew up in New Jersey.
I grew up in New Jersey, and like Liz, I fell in love with folk music at a very early age.
It's the folk music.
And there
wow.
was not that much folk music in my hometown. But I was a Boy Scout. I had a patrol leader who loved the Clancy Brothers and Tommy Macomb.
Oh my God.
So while he taught us to tie square knots and bowlines and half hitches and clove hitches, he would play the Clancy Brothers. And then when I found out that the Clancy Brothers had started out playing in Greenwich Village and even living in Greenwich Village, that focused my attention on the neighborhood. About the same time, I got really into Bob Dylan. I started listening to Bob
Same
Dylan's
for
albums
all
when
of
I
us.
found out that Dylan had started playing in the Village. That drew me to the neighborhood. And So by
Right.
the time I was about 15 years old on, I was sneaking off to Greenwich Village, despite my parents' efforts to keep me in the
From New
suburbs.
Jersey.
Yeah,
They thought you'd be corrupted.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. They wanted a yard for me. I wanted McDougal Street,
Yeah,
And
that's a T-shirt, by the way. We
You know.
should be selling them during the
Yeah, we
festival.
should be.
Right?
And then later on, when I grew up, I was in grad school at NYU in the 1980s, and I was drawn to NYU because it had a
Of
campus
course.
around Washington Square. It was like living on America's left bank. And in the middle of the 80s, I did another book. It was really my second book with a friend, Rebecca Zurier, about a whole generation of artists who came to New York City around 1900, 1910, and they painted scenes from everyday life. They were called the Ashcan artists. And they did a lot of paintings of Washington Square, Greenwich Village side streets. And I fell in love with their work. And Rebecca and I did a book in a Smithsonian exhibit about it.
How amazing.
wow.
Can you tell us?
Rooftop paintings as
Yeah.
well.
Can you
Yeah.
tell us the
Yeah.
name of the group again?
They're the Ashcan artists.
Ashcan artists. You know what? I know that's why I love doing this show. You just gave me something. I had no idea. So
Okay.
they were people that loved the Village as much as the two of you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They started out in the newspaper and graphics industry in Philadelphia. They studied painting, and they figured out that they could make bigger reputations for themselves if they went to New York City. So they went to New York City, and they turned fine art out of the everyday experiences of newspaper stories.
Love
So
it.
fires, crashes on the street, rooftop views, people flirting on the sidewalk. They made unforgettable
Nobody
paintings.
was
Well, they were
doing
kind
that.
of like the Greenwich Village Rockwell.
In a way, yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Where they
Sam,
would
yes.
capture,
And no,
capture life.
The slice of life in the
village.
village.
Grittier. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
but
John
a little
Sloan
grittier.
falls into
Yeah.
that group, isn't he?
John Sloan is absolutely central to that
Yeah.
group. In fact, I've done lectures about Sloan, and what I love
Oh, that's something
is
for
to
next year.
walk around the neighborhood and see these places where John Sloan and his friends used to live. And I always wonder, do the people in that building realize
Yeah, right,
who was there
exactly.
first?
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
Exactly. Do you have any idea
Yeah,
who lived here
yeah,
before you?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I love the John Sloan drawing I love is when they went up the arch. Was it 2020?
Yes,
1921, 22?
Earlier
Oh,
than
the
that.
arch in
yeah,
Washington
yeah,
Square
and
Park.
Washington
Yeah,
Square,
The People's Republic of
New
Washington
Bohemia,
Square.
yeah.
The new Bohemia.
Yeah.
It would secede from the Union,
yeah.
and I bet they wish they did.
Yeah, well, moments, I
Well,
think
you
so.
know what,
Yeah,
Liz? The day's still young. It could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be
Yeah,
doing a bit of
yeah.
trip.
It could happen with all in New
Yes,
York.
maybe during the village trip.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
thing
really.
The thing I loved about this show on the Ashcan Artists that Rebecca and I did with our friend Virginia Mecklenburg at Smithsonian was that ordinary New Yorkers came to the show and they'd look at a painting of Cherry Street, Henry Street,
Yeah.
Hester Street, Washington
Hester
Square, and they'd
Street.
straighten up and sort of square their shoulders. You know, my uncle lived on Henry Street. You know,
Yeah.
or my
Mhm.
grandfather used to go to Washington Square.
Yeah.
And they realized then that they were part of something really big.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the amount of immigrants in my
Exactly.
grandparents were
Yeah.
part of the people that emigrated here in the 1900s.
Yeah, yeah.
And the amount of them and the tenements you mentioned, there were paintings last night at the gallery
Yeah.
of the tenements. The tenements unto themselves to me are completely fascinating because that was New York life. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was not upscale, not even by the slightest, and entire families would cram themselves into these railroad apartments.
You know, I caught the last end of that when I moved to the village in 1980.
Where did you live on?
Thompson Street, 217
Thompson Street.
wow.
Wow.
Bleecker
Nice.
Street.
With a P.
Yeah, with a P. And there were a lot of older
As opposed
Italian
to without a
ladies in
P.
the building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And around
Yeah.
6 p.m., if I came home, they're all cooking these delicious sauces
Oh,
and things
yeah.
like that.
Right.
And it smelled so great to be
But
back.
But they were all Italian.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the thing. We it was really quite amazing, this whole area. What it
Well,
attracted.
and also just the evolution.
Yes.
The
Yeah,
evolution
yeah.
from the 1900s with the immigration and everything, everybody that was coming in and
Yeah.
Yep.
grouping together. Like you
Yeah.
said, that was Italian. It was a heavy Italian
yep,
neighborhood.
yep.
Right.
And,
I mean,
and
I really would like just to structure maybe a day around why, obviously all the immigration in and out, and you're going to address that in your Global Greenwich Village lecture, but it is amazing because you've got all these people here. And it's always, for 150 years or more, it's been a melting pot of ideas and creativity. And I suppose
Mhm.
that's always immigrant cities tend to be. I mean, the same with Liverpool, I guess, which was
Exactly.
But it is sort of in these tiny spaces, these crooked streets.
And
you know.
the tough thing to do, and this is so important in New York City, is learn how to get out of your small section of your neighborhood, your comfort zone,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and go
Right.
someplace new. Because
yeah.
if you're on Thompson Street with me, with my elderly Italian neighbors,
Right.
in a 10-minute walk, I was still on what remained of the Jewish Lower East Side.
Right.
Mhm.
And 10 minutes beyond that, I was on Lower East Side, the Puerto Rican Lower East Side.
Right.
And the trick is learning to get out of your little comfort zone
Mhm.
and stretch just a little bit, because you're going to learn a lot
Yeah,
more
yeah.
if you do.
Well,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. You're tuned in to If These Walls Could Talk with your hosts, Wendy Stuart and Tim Moss, and our wonderful and incredibly
Oh my
interesting
God.
guests, Liz Thompson and Robert Snyder.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So the festival, okay, you birthed it.
Yes,
You
I
did birth it.
Yeah, I did. I was actually, I've been obsessed, I had this obsession with the village. Although I first went to the West Coast initially, when I didn't come to New York until about 95, as a working journalist writing about the book trade. But at that time the psychogeography of it was really sort of clear in my head, where this club was, who lived there, those places. And so I was coming a few years as a journalist and staying at the Washington Square Hotel, which was the Earl, the place where California Dreamin' was written, and where Dylan and Byers had their great affair. It was that crummy hotel over Washington Square. And I got to know the family who still owned it. And, I said, is there a festival about, should be a festival? No, there's no festival. Why isn't there a festival? This is Britain, there'd be a festival. So I'm kind of, and they kind of said, well, if you want to do a festival, we'll comp a few rooms. So I said, okay. But I wasn't in a position to do it. And then, life moved on a bit, and, my parents had gone, and, the last vestige of formal job had gone. And I was doing a director's cut, if you like, of a book by a great friend of mine and someone you will know, Robert Shelton, who was the New York Times critic.
Oh, I actually know that name too.
Yeah,
It's
and
rare that I know it.
I mean, he gave Joan Byers her first review at
Right.
Newport. He wrote up, Dylan's famous Gertie's appearance, which launched his career. And he was living in London, where I kind of met him, not entirely by chance, because we were at an event that sort of allowed us to meet. And we became friends, and he was a sort of mentor to me. And he was struggling to publish his book on Dylan, which was years overdue by the time I met him in 1979. And it finally came out in 86, and it was, as Shelton said, abridged over troubled waters. because it had taken him by that time 20 years.
That's really
And
funny.
he always
Right?
did great pound ratio.
Right.
And he always hoped to revisit it. And he died quite suddenly, not quite 10 years later. And by that time, I knew his family. And when Dylan was going to be 70, I said, well, should we try and do publish the version that Robert wanted to publish, which was a much longer book, full of detail about the village. Yep, great idea. So we found a publisher. And while I was doing that, so I was, I had something, younger readers start here. I had the carbon copy of the manuscript on my left. Remember those things you put?
Yes.
them
When you
Yes.
had a carbon
Yes.
paper, my
and
God.
a scan of the published text on my computer, and I was going through and putting stuff back and finessing it all. So it was a very long book by the time. And while I was doing the chapters on Greenwich Village, which was incredibly evocative, there was a sentence where Shelton, who didn't drive, who had no sense of distance, he said something like, "The kettle of fish was about a mile from Gertie's folk city." And I thought, no, it wasn't. It's about 3 minutes walk.
It was a 3-minute walk, and he said it was.
So I sort of corrected it in the text, and then I thought, actually, wasn't it amazing that you had within just a few blocks, you had all these amazing
You're right.
clubs,
Right.
all this music, the jazz, the folk, the rock, wouldn't it be great? And you could have a festival, and you'd call it Bringing It All Back Home to Washington Square, kind of a nod to Henry James and Bob Dylan. So it came to me in a sort of Tennessee moment, So I kind of wrote it down and got on with the book, and I sort of talked to a few friends, and they sort of did the usual, yeah, well, whatever, you're kind of nuts, So,
You got another crazy idea.
yeah. So then I was interviewing Janice Ian, who wrote,
Oh my
He was
God.
Society's Child. We were in just outside Edinburgh where she was touring, and I said, I've had this, and we knew each other somewhat. I said, I've had this kind of crazy idea for festival celebrating the village. And she said, that's a great idea, but don't just do it once, make it annual. So I said, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I love the way everyone, it's like, it's so easy. First of all, and
Yeah,
you're
right.
like, oh yeah, we'll have a festival.
Yeah.
Janice and it's like, oh yeah, go for it. What a really
said,
smashing
I'll
great
play.
idea.
I'll play. I mean, I still think she
Right.
will one day. So anyway, so I kind of rewrote my outline again, and I kind of lodged it with a lawyer because I had such a good idea. It'd be stolen immediately, and then I sort of came to New York and sort of started talking to people. And I realized it shouldn't just be about music; it should be about much more. So this,
Which makes this festival so
yeah,
interesting.
so I
my
went
God.
around talking to people, and people said, "Oh, well, that's ambitious," And Janice gave me 2 very good bits of advice. She gave me a nice testimonial, which she said, "You have to have David Amram because he's so wonderful, and you have to have Doug Yeager, who's his manager, because he's so nice." And they both came on board. So I went. So a couple of years later, when I got everyone sort of teed up, no money, but everyone saying, "Yeah, okay, we'll support you if you do
Right,
X,
but
Y,
no
Z."
money, no
Yeah.
money. Oh, what a great idea.
So Amram was playing Cornelia Street Cafe on Cornelia Street, which is now gone, sadly. The cafe, not the street. And so I went to hear him play, and I typed out and printed an actual letter, and I waited in line to give it to him after the show, which was quite long. And he was then 88 or something, So, and he chats to everyone, and I'm sort of back down the line. So eventually I get to him, Mr. Amram, can I give you this? I want to start a festival in Greenwich Village, and I'll play. I didn't get to the end of my sentence. And I said, but you don't know what it is. I'll play. So I said, well,
Wow,
I can pay
wonderful.
you. I'll play.
Yeah.
So I said, well, okay, that's very nice. Well, here's the letter, go and read it and kind of ring me, call me or whatever you say. Anyway, by the time, that was about 11 o'clock. He went out to dinner, drove the 60 miles back to Beacon. And by the time I awoke the next morning, he'd written me this long email saying, this is great. This is what we'll do. I'll play my Greenwich Village portraits.
Oh,
We'll
wow.
get
That's
to do with
wonderful.
Fabulous,
We'll read some
Liz.
Kerouac and so on. So I had this
Right.
a program, I had that bit of
He
that.
had like put together a basic program for you.
Yeah.
That is unbelievably pivoted.
Yeah, it was
It's
amazing.
amazing.
People
Oh, the Jefferson
seem to
Market,
have
yeah.
just a deep, undying devotion
Right.
to Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
They do.
People
and
who
David
experienced it.
certainly does.
Uh-huh.
So then I said, well, let's make you artist in residence, and we'll put you in the Washington Square Hotel for
Nice.
what was the 3-day festival.
Which you had already set up. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm saying this because the way the piece is, you could not have planned any of this. First of
No.
all, it's a very daft idea to think you're going to
It is
do
a
an
crazy
entire.
idea across the
But,
country.
no, but we're crazy.
I'm not a trust fund baby.
No, and right, I got that. But and Tim is also, we're into people that just come up with an idea and go for it.
Mhm.
Because
And
you
make
know
it
what?
happen.
Instinctively, you knew you had to do it. It was the right thing.
Yeah.
The hotel was landed in your lap. You
Yeah.
had a place for people to stay. The same way you met David.
Yeah.
He's like, oh yeah, here's everything that you have to do. Come on.
I mean, I'm
We're gonna
not a
plan
particularly
that.
brave or particularly foolhardy person. But I had this idea, and I sort of felt, I think it's a good idea. I really have to do it. And I thought, I don't have a go, I'll kind of go to my grave thinking, well, coulda, shoulda, woulda. And it was, but and I should say that, you know, by that stage, you know, the kind of Judy and Mark who run the hotel now, you know, they kind of obviously thought she's going to lose her shirt as much besides on this, but they said, okay, if you want to do this, we'll support you. You can stay in the hotel as our guest. We won't charge you, and you can entertain here, and we'll do some.
And that's the Washington Square Hotel. A shout out also to the Washington Square
It's
Hotel.
a great place, and it does have this amazing history. Full of history.
Yeah.
So I was able to start it tentatively, but of course I have spent a fortune, and I started thinking, well, I'll just spend £3,000 or $5,000, and of course.
5 times that.
Yeah, and now the dollar's at 115 to the pound, so it's really
So here we are, ka-ching, 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 ka-ching.
Well, you are watching If These Walls Could Talk with your hosts Wendy Stuart and Tim Moss, and our wonderful guests Liz Thompson and Robert Snyder.
So this is a question that I don't have as much history knowledge that you do. But when I look at how New York was built, right? My grandparents were immigrants, as were many people. There were always moneyed people here. But the people that built New York, and I'm sure you're on board with me, Tim, with this, it was the people that had struggled, the artists, the musicians, right? So how do the both of you, I feel about you've created this amazing festival. How do you think this is going to impact the New York that we're in now? Remember, when you went to NYU, it was that one little campus. Now it is $64,000 a year.
When I went to NYU to get my PhD in American history, I had an apartment on Thompson Street that I shared with another guy.
Right.
2 tiny bedrooms.
Right. $500 a month. Even less.
150
for
2 guys.
Right, for 2, right.
Now, when I tell that to my students today, they gasp.
Right.
Because that apartment probably goes for $4,000.
It's kind of dinner now, isn't it?
If 2 guys are sharing it, it's $2,000 a piece.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And I really think that's dangerous for New York City.
I agree.
Because New York City is made by people who come here from somewhere else to start their lives over again and make a new beginning.
And it may be difficult, but it's manageable. You figure out a way to do it. Nowadays, I don't know how people can do it.
If you can find a place to live for a reasonable cost, you can then pursue a passion or a dream or an unusual
Well,
job.
and you could used to be able to work a million jobs. I had a gazillion jobs when I came here after college. That is not the case anymore because they still can't pay their rent. You have that. You've got the development. I mean, this area, right where we are here, PANGEA, historical building that has hosted amazing people, right? In the music world. Right next door on the other side of this wall, there's often drilling because another building is going up. And New York has been attacked. The last vestige is around here, and you know they're going to go for it. How do we hang on to our history? Can something like the Village Trip Festival, moving it forward, right, and getting celebrities, a lot of them on board, do you think it can impact what's going on in New York?
Well, I think it can help people appreciate the value of having neighborhoods where there's a mix of different kinds of people. And it's not just a monoculture. If New York City just becomes a museum of inherited wealth, it's going to go down the tubes.
Great phraseology.
I mean, it's a different city without the culture. I mean, any city is different without the culture. And I mean, it is, the gentleman Christopher Hitchens wrote that great piece for Vanity Fair, I guess it was, wasn't it, when the hospital was pulled down.
St. Vincent's, where my daughter was born.
They
made it into condos. Where my daughter was born and many friends died.
Yes.
How could they have made that into condos?
Well,
I could never even live in a building like that with that kind of.
And he wrote this very poignant piece, didn't he, about the death of, not the death of Bohemia, but it is sort of about the death of Bohemia, and where do our artists go? And it's the same in Paris, it's the same in London. But if you push people out completely, I mean, what's the famous Paul Simon line about rooms to rent on Bleecker Street, 30 cents or something? I can't quite remember the quote. But Dylan came here and rented his room on West 4th Street above a spaghetti parlor for tuppence. You'd have to be, you would have to be a trust fund baby to come and pretend to be a starving artist.
Right,
you
exactly.
just cannot survive.
Absolutely.
And that is really sad. I mean, like, you can't, I suppose, preserve.
But that's one of the things that feeds and deepens the art is the struggle.
Yes.
Sure.
And
Right. The
and
struggle is
again,
real.
if you're a
Right.
what did you say?
Trust
A
fund
trust fund
baby,
baby.
yeah.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
you're a
yeah.
trust fund baby,
Right.
there's no struggle. You
But
just go
but it's
and
become
there's
so crazy now. I mean, it's
It
one
is.
thing kind of
I
not
agree.
having much money to, oh, I've got enough money to pay to go out, but then there's crazy where you just can't afford anything,
Mhm.
Right.
you can't.
right.
And art becomes an indulgence for people with money to spare. That's not
Mhm.
what it should be.
Yeah.
The big problem is that we're going to need more housing for more low
Yeah.
income people.
And we do
Where
too
to
in
build
the
it,
UK.
how to build
You
it.
do in the
is-
UK
is
as well,
really,
right.
really important.
Right.
The same conversation that we have in New York
Ah.
City is had in London, is had in San
All over the
Francisco,
world,
is
right.
had in Boston, and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the big dynamic cities. And they could be brought low in cultural terms
Yes.
by not having the mix of people that made them so
Yeah,
energetic.
and we in London, and I'm sure you hear, someone comes in with a great development plan, you build this huge skyscraper with 100 apartments, and there are 5 apartments
Yeah,
maybe,
no,
and they have a poor door where
Right.
those who haven't got
We
money
have
go
that in
in.
New York. I read
Yeah,
that. I
yeah,
couldn't.
yeah.
They have a floor
Yeah.
dedicated in a separate
Yeah.
I mean,
entrance.
it's disgusting.
It's
Yeah.
disgusting.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
disgusting.
And the kind of, it's very sad. I mean, every city has its homeless, but it is very, especially post-pandemic now, it's very sad to see, even around Washington Square, it's,
Sure.
I mean, it's
Sure.
it's not nice to see people shooting up anywhere, but there are lots of people who just have nowhere to go.
Mhm.
No.
Right. And Washington Square has changed in that degree. During the pandemic, a lot of really bad things came down in
Yeah.
there because people had there was always fringe people. But the pandemic really took and dumped with no solution.
Yeah.
They live in the park, they shoot up in the park. And it amazes me because when I'm in the village, I'll see these kids in designer clothes having drinks at Julius with
Mhm.
our friend Evan Lawrence, sitting outside, and these
Yeah,
kids go by in designer clothes with their pedigree dog.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my
That's
God.
There's
what the
such a
village has
disconnect
become.
Right.
between
Yes.
there's such a disparity between
Disparity.
those who have and those who haven't.
Yes.
I mean, when we were students or whatever,
Yeah.
which we all were
Yeah.
much so.
Mhm.
Disparity.
No one kind of really dressed up. You all kind of, no one particular, or a few people maybe had money, but basically you're all kind of the same.
Right.
And now you're very aware that there are rich students and there are people who, I mean, God knows how anyone affords NYU now.
Right.
But,
You know what? I hate to say this easily. Because while we were all worshiping our history and what our lives were, there was a whole class, not just here, it is all over the world. And it's not 1%, it's way more than that. It's 64,000 a year, not even a drop in the bucket.
I know.
You
It's
know?
sad. Yeah. Well, you are watching If These Walls Could Talk with your hosts, Wendy Stuart and Tim Moss, and our wonderful and incredible guests
Thank you.
from the Village Trip, Liz Thompson and Robert Snyder. Now, Robert, why do you suppose it was about the Village, about this strip of land in Manhattan that was almost like a magnet for artistic creation?
For a couple of reasons, and I think the basic one that you have to start with, and more than 100 years ago, late 19th, early 20th century, was it was affordable. It was cheap. People could find places
Boiling
to
back
live
to
here
economics.
and settle in. And it became a magnet for all kinds of people. It became a magnet for immigrants. There were Italian people moving in on Thompson Street and other parts of what was northern Little Italy then. But then you had these ashcan artists and other guys like that.
Right.
John Reed, the journalist, came here too, and he settled in. And he had a great line. He said that by living where he did in the Village, he could see the whole world in a 15-minute walk from his apartment building.
And that is the
And
truth.
that was what attracted me to the neighborhood too.
Mhm.
That in a densely populated neighborhood like that, with so many nooks and crannies and so many different kinds of people, a walk on the block, around the block, introduced you to things you'd never seen before and thought
Yeah.
about before. And I like that.
Yeah,
And
I like that.
absolutely.
It's a
I-
diversity, and Donna Florio, who wrote "Growing Up Bank
fabulous
Street,"
memoir.
right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think
Mhm.
she, by way of Donna
Introduced us.
Florio, is how you guys got here.
Indeed.
I adore her. Grew up on Bank Street.
Yeah.
Her book is so incredible because Lou Reed, John and Yoko Ono. She goes right through all of these people that
And the
were.
communists who were kind of
And then the communists in the middle of this,
downstairs.
right?
Yeah.
We had
And
everything.
everybody living together.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
Donna
yeah.
grew up
Yeah.
in the middle of this cultural treasure to me.
Mhm.
Yeah, and her parents were at the Met. Or
Yeah, and
or
her parents
originally
say
at
they
the-
were opera
at
people,
the,
like
Amato Company on Bleecker Street.
right.
No, I mean, it's extraordinary. And all that's still here. Actually, I was just going to say, you just mentioned John Reed. That opening scene of Reds, which no one ever watches now, 'cause I'd love to do the whole thing and have Warren Beatty come and talk about it. But they, that opening scene where they all, there's John, the people who John Reed, Menzies, Millay, and Eugene, they're all, and all those people. I mean, that's Eugene O'Neill. Provincetown Playhouse, Edison. They were all
Emma
there.
Goldman,
They were Emma Goldman. There they all were. These great, these great activists and artists.
Yes.
All together in that opening scene. In a way, kind of sums up the village at that time.
The key thing I learned when I moved to the village was that everybody thought it was better 20 years ago. So if I arrived in 1980,
you
should have been here in 60s.
Yeah,
in the 60s, I'm sure people were, in the
so funny.
40s,
Oh my
the
God.
almanac singers were here with Pete Seeger and Woody
Right.
Guthrie. But in the 40s, people would have said the 20s, and a little before
That
that,
is
you would have
that's
had John
interesting.
Reed,
Very
Emma Goldman,
funny.
And in the
Artists.
2000s, they're saying, "Oh my God, you should have been here in the 80s."
Right.
And of course, it's amazing when I sit down with David Amram, which I've heard so many stories now. But the woman, actually, I stay with the mum of the hotel, who's an amazing 95 Rita.
That's a 95-year-old you were talking
yeah,
about.
that's right. So I brought her to dinner with Cliff, who you've interviewed, and David Amram and Doug last year. And immediately, Rita said, "Well, did you know Alice Neal?" And David said, "Yes, I knew Alice Neal." And then he's talking about, he was hanging out at the Cedar Tavern with Jackson Pollock, and Kerouac was there, and so
Wow.
and it's like going into that movie Zelig. There was David with all these people just hanging out, and he said we all had second jobs, in the post office or bartending or whatever, and all these people not yet known,
Right.
down there. I mean,
And that was
when you look
normal.
back at it,
Right.
it's incredible,
Jackson Pollock and Kerouac all in the
Yeah.
same group. I mean, right? And they all work two jobs.
Yeah.
What in New York it
and the
was.
amazing thing about having David as artist emeritus, as he now is, is that he and Jack Kerouac brought poetry and jazz to New York. At the 5 spot in the a gallery here in East Village whose name escapes you. I'm having a senior moment, sorry. But and they were playing at the Figaro, before On the
Cafe
Road was
Figaro.
published. And before On the Road was published, and then everyone kind of just put on their berets and their dark glasses and their striped t-shirts, and they came in, and Kerouac left, kind of tragically, and did what he did. But it's amazing that there are still those connections, and it's important. I think history. I mean, it seems to me that in our country, and I'm sure yours, lots of people don't know anything about history, including our leaders. Remember, David Cameron came here and did an interview on Letterman, and he clearly didn't understand that America didn't come in World War II until 1941. And he thought, this is the most expensive education you can have, and he doesn't know about Pearl
That's
Harbor.
real. That's funny.
But people don't in general know, and you want people to realize that on this corner here, this happened, and actually, John Reed, who wrote this amazing book, 10 Days That Shook the World, New So-and-so, and that limited. It's the kind of the cross hatching of all these lines.
But isn't that what
Exactly.
you're doing with this festival?
Yes.
Yeah.
Every
And-
component.
And it's looking in nooks and crannies where you
Yeah.
didn't look before.
Yes.
I had no idea what I was going to talk about when I talked about the history of Greenwich Village, but I began to dig. I found on Thompson Street in the 1880s, Cuban and Puerto Rican men of African descent fighting for the freedom of Cuba and racial justice in Cuba.
Wow.
Right.
I found a Jewish artist around the corner, Chaim Gross, who did an amazing life of sculpture from the 20s to the recent past about his life in Europe, his life in America, and everything in between. I all learned about this, even though I'd lived on that block for 10 years. I knew none
Wow.
of it. It's in
course.
writing this lecture that I
Right.
learned
I
about
mean,
it.
Greenwich is like a giant onion, isn't it? You
Yeah.
kind of
An
want to-
onion
Something
that
else
you-
comes out,
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
just keep peeling.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
really
And they really actually just this not germane to what you're saying. It's fun. It's very funny serendipity and all this, and there's been lots of it. A neighbour of mine back in Muswell Hill, North London. I was at a Labour Party Christmas drinks. What are you doing? So I said, I've got this kind of crazy idea and he said, I ought to put you in touch with my friend Rob Snyder.
Oh my gosh, Alan Morton.
Sure.
Sure.
Alan Morton,
Yeah.
And then I was
That's
on
so
the
funny.
A train going up to the Million Women March in
Yeah.
January of 17 when I was here, just starting all this, and I got chatting to this guy next to me because his placard, and it was Mark Kehoe, who's an artist, so we exchanged cards.
I love
That
I was
that.
doing this
Gentleman
crazy
from
festival.
West
One day we're going to work together, and then here we are. He's curated. So all this stuff just comes together.
Yes,
Everything is
I
possible
love
in
how
the village.
Absolutely, and I love
Yeah.
how organic.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
And last
happens.
year on the
Yeah.
bandstand in Washington Square Park, when everyone had finished dancing to Bobby Sanabria, there was Jamie Bernstein, the maestro's daughter. The maestro for whom, of course, David
Leonard
Amram
Bernstein's
worked.
daughter. Wow.
And she
Right.
led off the dancing. She'd been there all afternoon. And I was introduced by Janice Siegler with Manhattan Transfer, had been singing. And I said, wouldn't it be great? Could we do something on Wonderful Town, which is Bernstein's Greenwich
Yes.
Village musical? And she said, oh, be still my beating heart. So I said, well, can we talk? So we had a talk, and then we got together in January, and we're doing, Jamie is leading a walk of all the locations in the musical around Washington Square. And the interesting thing is that Comden, Betty Comden and Adolph Green, who wrote the book, came to brunch at what was then the Earl and then the Washington Square Hotel. Bernstein lived down there. So she's doing the walk, and then Janice Siegel and Jamie's involved as well. We're having a cabaret of songs from Wonderful Town in the hotel. And they've been so nice. These big name artists who said, yeah, we'll do it. We'll come and play.
That's what I mean.
It is what Tim said,
for the village.
Organic and
incredible.
serendipitous in many
absolutely.
ways.
So fantastic,
Well, you are watching If These Walls Could Talk with your hosts, Wendy Stuart and Tim Moss, our wonderful guests, Liz Thompson and Robert Snyder.
I want to get into the nuts and bolts of the festivals, because 2 weeks, 3 weekends, 85 events, 200 musicians, 37 performances, 43 walking tours, 5 topical talk lectures, panel discussions, and 50 artists. And may I tell you, it's all free.
It's not all free. We are charging with stuff, but a lot of it's free.
A lot of it is free.
I thought I was a bit tired, actually, Cliff, and that explains it.
Right.
She kind of summed it up.
But it is really, it's incredible.
Well, it's kind of grown like Topsy from 3.5 days and sort of half a dozen events. And we did 9 days last year. And this year it's actually 25th September is the last day. So it's full 15 days. And some of the walks and talks we've actually created, like Wonderful Town. Others we've kind of gone to people and they've kind of come up with stuff. Like your colleague Kathleen Hulser, who you recommended to me.
Great
This wonderful walk about
boho,
the Mad Rad Boho. So we have created a lot of stuff out of our heads. And then, it's, well, we need this and let's go and find. So, and we've tried to make it family friendly. Kathleen came up with this phrase. It was Kathleen, not you, I think.
High-mindedness and hijinks.
Hijinks and high
Wait,
ideals.
high-mindedness.
Hijinks and high ideals.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
So what people have things to think about and to learn stuff, but also have great fun, because that's what the village is. It's always had that combination of complete nuttiness.
Well, and just an open-mindedness.
Yes.
That's the thing. That's the thing I've always appreciated about the village.
Yeah.
And
So,
I think you think about the families that are still raising their kids here, right?
And there are a lot of them.
Thank you. And that's the next generation.
Yeah.
Okay. And we want them to learn the history. What could be
Absolutely.
better than to have a festival like the one you're
Because
producing?
that is important. There are high schools and junior, what we call them primary schools. You call them the school,
Middle schools. Or elementary.
There are families that are living here in regular housing. It's not, there are all these expensive condos and townhouses, being knocked into one house, 3 houses. But there is still a community here.
Yes.
Some of them living in the same houses their parents grew up. There's still, and we have to cherish those communities.
I agree.
See,
I back in the 80s when I first moved to New York, I got into real estate, or got pulled into real estate, which I didn't like.
You did.
But I started noticing neighborhoods, and especially the village, which again, from a gay man's perspective, is the holy ground. The village with Stonewall, and there's so much history and so much that came out of that. And I noticed that the artist, the gay community will move into a neighborhood and fix it up, which basically they did in the village.
Right.
They made it, they decorated everything, they fixed their things, and then Wall Street, which was happening at that time, started moving in because, the village is the place to be, and money wins out.
Right.
So all of the artists and the LGBT moved to another neighborhood, like in, say, Chelsea, for example. Same thing happens. It's redeveloped, it's fixed up, the money comes in, they're pushed out, they move into the next neighborhood to fix that up. And I'm seeing all of this happening. I've seen it for decades, and it's horrifying. But I am so grateful for you, for what you are, the two of you are doing in preserving the history of these amazing
I just feel like
areas.
A pushy Brit coming in and poking my
Oh my
nose.
gosh.
But maybe people from the outside, you see it differently. But just as people come to London, they say, "Oh, it's nice." Yeah, I guess. It's always been.
You are
you come here.
passionate.
And I do feel passionate about and preserving it. And you just mentioned Stonewall, which was everyone around the world.
Right.
But in fact, in the late 1800s, Whitman was coming into the village
Mhm.
from Brooklyn or wherever to go to fairy clubs, as they were called.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
yeah,
been this sort of
yeah.
tolerance of this, and
Yeah.
you know, and I
Right.
want us to kind of. I mean, there's so much to do. You know, I want to celebrate Mabel Dodge and her salon.
Yes.
And the great
And-
and the great thing about it this year is you're reaching into the East Village, which goes
Yeah,
the bridge
yeah,
across
right,
Broadway.
yeah. So the
And-
idea was
and
Washington
it-
Square, then we
And you expand out
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
you get a sense of
Well,
two pieces.
Just one
of Lower
block from
Manhattan.
here, 9th Street.
Mhm.
Oh my God, the
Yeah.
the stories on 9th Street, the people
Right,
that live
right.
there,
Yeah.
that's one block, to your point, one block and a gazillion stories.
Mhm.
I know,
Yep.
and it is astonishing. It is absolutely. I find it.
Now, can you give all the information about the festival, where they can reach you, and when, and the dates?
Okay, I guess www.thevillagetrip.com. A very comprehensive website. We also have, for the first time this year, we're kind of growing up. We've got 2 print supplements. The whole program in the Village Sun, which is in its inaugural print issue. Thank you, Dan.
There
our
you
lovely-
go, right to the camera.
The Village Sun. This is Lincoln, real local journalism. Lincoln Anderson's first print issue. It was online before. And we have this amazing supplement. And the supplement will also appear in Westview News. I think it's out any minute, probably today. So we're blanketing the village with this. I'm just going to show you our cool cover.
Oh my God.
And the cup of the
Here, I'll help you with
whoops,
it. Here, let me pull
the
that.
yellow bit.
There we go.
We have this great graphic
Oh,
done
that's
by our young
fabulous.
intern, Seth, who's in the Carolinas in Savannah, I think. We've got a 2-week campaign that started on New York Public Radio and the Gothamist. So that's very exciting on WQXR and WNYC. So we kind of, we think this is a big deal for us.
Mhm.
It's a big deal for
it's
us.
really- it's a
It's a
big
big
deal.
deal.
And we actually kick off properly on 8th Street on Saturday at 2:00 with a street party with David Amram and friends. And he's got some pretty amazing friends, we've just said. Tilted Axes, the wonderful mobile guitar orchestra, Dave Keys, Antoinette Montague. And we're working with the Village Alliance, who is the neighborhood grouping business bid, as you know, and kindly sponsored by Con Ed. So we got an amazing
Con
afternoon.
Ed sponsored it.
Yeah, there's a bit of Con Ed.
See, they do good
And
stuff
it's
too.
not just me. We've got animal adoption. There's
Great. I love
giant
it.
games for kids. There's food. There's a silent disco up the other end. If you don't want to kind of listen to David's jazz or whatever, it's a real family event, and restaurants and
Mhm.
bars along that street will be involved.
Love it.
And then and there's a guitar that segues into a 4-hour-long guitar festival at St. John's Village. Every kind of guitar music.
Nice.
So Tilted Axis will process from St. John's through the park to Astor Place, down 8th Street to meet David Amram, back to St. John's in the Village. And then Sunday we have David Amram will be celebrating Jack Kerouac and classical music at St.
Wow.
John's. We have Jamie Bernstein's fabulous Wonderful Town Walk, and then the cabaret. And then we're into a whole 2 weeks of events of folk,
Nice.
jazz, rock.
And this begins September 10th.
Yep.
September
this-
10th.
Yeah.
And it ends on September the 25th, in fact, but on September the
Nice.
24th, we have our signature event, the free concert in Washington Square Park, which is headlined this year by the Klezmatics, who are of this neighborhood,
Amazing,
Yes,
right.
yes.
with Joshua Nelson. So it's Klezmer meets gospel. And another
Which
local,
was when I first heard about that, I'm like, oh my God, if
And
that's not a melting
the
pot. I don't know
Reverend
what is.
Billy and the church, the choir of the
Reverend Billy,
Church of Stop Shopping. So it's a very cool downtown event. That's at 4 till 7. And last year we looked at Bobby Sanabia and his big band in the park, Cliff and I. And it was very hot, and I kind of sat on the stage side and I said, "Holy shit, Cliff, how are we going to top this?" Because about 3,000 people danced this 25-piece band. It was
Nice.
amazing, actually. It was real goosebumps.
Nice.
At the end of that sort of pandemic period, it was
Right.
this was fantastic. So we've got Rob's fantastic. I've always wanted a village trip lecture, and Rob
Thank
kindly
you.
agreed to
Thank
do
you.
one
Thank
this year.
you.
So he's at
Thank
the
you.
Jefferson Market Library. We've got a panel on Eleanor Roosevelt in her 60th anniversary year,
Yes.
Yes.
with women's rights are human rights.
Yeah, yeah.
Which Kathleen is directing. That'll be exciting. We've got lots of Kerouac 100,
Mhm.
including a reading at the Strand with really amazing
Readers,
group of
yeah.
actors who
Yeah,
are
who
reading,
are
directed
reading.
by David Devlinger of HB Studios, with music by David Amram, of course, because he did it for Kerouac originally. We've got a ton, and a fantastic classical program curated by William Anderson. So we've got all sorts of, we've got some classical meets jazz, pure classical music. I mean, lots of really, really exciting stuff. Third Street's involved, the settlement school. And what William has done, in the way that Robert was just talking, he's managed to kind of find here's this Phil Oakes or Suzanne Vega, and we're going to do some classical stuff with that period. And here's this Bauhaus figure who links with Stephen Volper, who links with Charlie Parker. So we're trying to bring everything together into this sort of holistic presentation that shows that everything kind of comes together in the village.
Right.
I mean, sort of everything. Really.
Well, it comes
Yeah,
together and
something.
everything works off of everything else, as you know.
And you can find a full schedule at thevillagetrip.com, and we'll have a full schedule. Now, Robert, how can people find out more about you and your writings and your books?
Well, I've written lots of books about New York City. The two most recent are one called Crossing Broadway, Washington Heights and the Promise of New York.
Which
and
is my neighborhood.
Yeah, glad to hear you're out
Tim
there.
Moss is the promise of New York.
And it's all about how people in the neighborhood learn to come out of their isolation and work with each other despite all their differences to save their neighborhood in the hard years of the 1990s and the early 2000s. And then I co-authored a book with a friend of mine, All the Nations Under Heaven. It's a history of New York City through immigration and migration, and how newcomers to this city again and again and again have brought it the energy and the prosperity that makes it a lively place, and the importance of maintaining that in the future.
So how can people find out more? Do you have a website?
I'm R.W. Snyder at Rutgers.edu. Email me. I
Okay.
don't have
Rutgers,
a website.
Okay.
I don't have a website.
But
yet.
also, I mean, you can go to Amazon or Barnes and
all
Noble
sold,
and
yeah,
type
all
in
sold, all sold
Robert
Barnes-
W. Snyder.
all sold at Barnes and Noble, on Amazon, and where better books are sold.
And he has a whole list.
I
of
like that
books,
where the
so-
better books are sold.
And the Strand.
Oh,
the Strand,
my
of
And the
course.
Strand.
And the
of course.
Strand,
My
right.
sister and I had back-to-back bookshelves on the Strand.
Oh, good.
Are you
I'm
kidding?
very proud of that.
So
how
please
funny.
be sure to go check out the Village Trip. And again, check it out. Get all the information at thevillagetrip.com. Liz Thompson and Robert Snyder, thank you so very much. We appreciate
you for
you
having
taking
us.
some
Yeah,
time.
really.
and
Come
chatting.
along, and we look
Yeah.
forward. Come and say
Absolutely.
hi to
Absolutely.
Cliff and I, and
I cannot wait.
come and join the fun.
I cannot wait.
Come join the
thank
fun.
you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone,
you.
in the village.
Now, actually, that concludes the broadcast version. So now we can just sit back and chat and talk about the rest of this stuff. So, because I've got so many questions
Of
for
course,
you about
yeah.
about being a
Sure.
New York City historian.
Yeah.
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 So, do you specialize in Manhattan or all 5 boroughs?
You know,
or?
I'm a Manhattan Borough historian. I was appointed by Gail Brewer when she,
Oh, Gail.
when she was
Yeah.
the borough president, and then I'm still on with
Eric?
Levine as the
Mark, yeah.
Levine,
Mark,
the current
yeah.
borough historian. I chose this, fairly early on. I was in grad school looking around for a dissertation. I liked the idea of going in grad school in New York. I love going to NYU. I love going to grad school in the Village. And my first book, which was really based on my dissertation, was about vaudeville theater. in
Oh
New
my
York
God,
City
how
in the
cool.
early 20th century.
That would have been a fascinating time period as
Yeah.
well.
Oh, right?
That's if I could go back to one period in New
It
It
York
would be
City.
vaudeville?
Well, not in vaudeville, but almost like that John Reed period.
Yeah.
Just before World War I, when
Yes.
it all goes to pot, right?
Wow.
Right.
That is actually the one period I would
Very
like to
special
visit if I
time.
could.
Well, also,
If I
I mean,
could.
again, just very open, very
Yep.
free,
Yep.
very,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
that
No.
would be interesting.
I did another book. I was an oral history of transit workers in New York City.
Oh, wow.
My grandfather was a transit worker. And
So that I was going to ask, what was the
stories.
interest there?
The interest was a freelance writer, and I needed a job, and they advertised.
The usual thing.
Your
Yeah,
grandfather,
yeah, exactly.
you know, you had your grandfather
But I
to.
sent them a chapter of my first book, and then talked
Sweet.
about my family connections. And then I worked at Newsday for a while. I was the researcher on a book called City of the World, done by a spectacular editor there, Bernie Bookbinder, about New York and immigration. That's a beautiful illustrated book. And then the book that I did with Rebecca Zurier, Metropolitan Lives, the Ashcan artists in there, New York.
Yeah, that
And
completely
that's so
interests
amazing.
me. Yeah.
I think that's a fascinating period.
Mhm.
1900 to 1917 in Greenwich Village is really, really.
Well, the
interesting.
type of artwork, as Tim said, the Norman Rockwell of New York, and
Yeah.
catching that
Mhm.
moment.
Yeah.
I had no idea to you. I'm definitely Googling that one.
with a gritty edge to it. That's what.
Yeah,
that was
that's what
was
it
great
had
about
to, right?
It
It's
had
New
to.
York.
That's why they called them the Ashcan artists,
But
right?
and also just how life and living and buildings had evolved and changed over time with indoor plumbing and lighting and all of that, because New York was one of the first cities in the New World that to be established, was it not?
Yeah, it's not as old as some other cities, but it's an old city.
It's one of our oldest.
It's got a lot of history, right? Its infrastructure is old. Its buildings are old. And that makes problems sometimes.
Absolutely.
Right? But it gives us a depth and a complexity that I think makes us a better city for it in the end.
Right.
Because we're constantly used to
that Robert Moses would have just kind of sent the power drivers through. I mean, I kind of assume when I kind of began really looking at this that, the reason that Soho was kind of cheap for a long time was that presumably it was under threat from Robert Moses and the power drivers.
Oh,
and then
right.
It wasn't,
Right.
Is that the case?
I think that's the case. I must say this. I think that Robert Moses did things that were very wrong, right? However, he was not a dictator. He had a lot of support. He reflected the conventional wisdom of his time. It's not that Robert Moses by himself, one bad man.
Well, it's not, there's always like
doing some really good
he
things.
started doing some very good things.
And I love Robert Moses State Park. I grew up, as a kid, growing up in the Bronx, family would go there. I loved it.
But like here in Manhattan, there's so much here and so much history. Like, for one thing, the development and design of Central Park.
Oh my God,
the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side,
all the different neighborhoods.
Midtown, because so many people across the country, when they think of New York City, they think of Midtown, from 59th Street down to maybe 34th Street. And there's so much more. Harlem. And the Renaissance and everything, the history of Harlem, and again, Washington Heights.
I remember actually being as much as I love the idea of New York, and I went to San Francisco first for whatever reason. I was invited. I was kind of somewhat intimidated by the idea of the city, all those movies, I suppose. And then I came, and then you realize actually people are incredibly friendly. It's a collection.
It's a collection.
It's a connection of villages. Exactly.
And, I mean, people are incredibly nice. I mean, like anywhere you can get yourself into trouble, but that happens everywhere. I mean, it's the most.
And you've got good and bad everywhere. It's just here in New York. Here in New York, there's so many people wanting to live in the same place. They've ran out of space, so they've had to build up. So that there's more people per square inch in this town.
It can be very intense,
It totally can be, but isn't that what we love about it?
But
too?
that's, and that's what creates
that. But it's amazing. I just love it. I mean, I think in another life, had I been a bit smarter when I was 18 or 21, I'd have kind of applied for a postgrad and tried to come here, and either I could have lived.
You could have done it that way, right?
But I didn't really know how to do that. Right?
But maybe you were here in another life.
Yeah, maybe I was here in another life. But I love, and you kind of read about the stuff that was going to go back. I mean, maybe we need to celebrate the Emmas one time. Emma Goldman and Emma Lazarus and all those people. I haven't done it.
Emmas.
Yes,
the Emmas Festival.
But I remember the first time I sailed past the Statue of Liberty because I climbed up to the torch, as you could do back then. And I still cry. It is amazing. Give to me your
Oh, it's still overwhelming to me when I go, like on the Staten Island ferry or something.
The homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. How amazing is that?
Yes. And one of the things I was thinking the other day is most people that are coming in now never experienced the Statue of Liberty. It used to be the immigrants came in on ships. Now they come in JFK and LaGuardia and
on Ellis Island. Two of them. I mean, it is the most amazing museum.
I agree.
I know Trump wanted to make it a hotel, but he couldn't. It's the most amazing. When you stand, and you think, well, what must it have been like to actually,
how did they feel?
And it's right there. It's right there.
Signing their names in the book as they came in.
And there's people. I know someone comes from Boston and Philadelphia, but I mean, it is just you can't be there and not feel that kind of. And I was a student who had great connection with Liverpool, where of course a lot of people sailed from Liverpool to New York. And I think again, I did bring my dad back actually in 2000 after my mother died. We came and we found some of the places he'd been to, but I didn't really realize enough how extraordinary it must have been sailing in 1941, 42 across the Atlantic with the U-boats. And leaving Britain, which was really very basic, and of course we had blackouts. We didn't and you've come across, you've made this perilous voyage across the Atlantic, and then out of the darkness, there's Manhattan, glinting. I mean, it must have been absolutely. I mean, I wish I could share that with him now, and of course it's too late, as it inevitably is. But it is extraordinary to think of all that, and it's. I mean, and you know, and there's lots of really good novels. I mean, not just old novels, but kind of more recent novels that look at sort of, you know, set around the turn of the century and into. It's extraordinary. It's
Yeah.
just extraordinary.
Liz,
And
you
the
could-
thing is-
yeah, I wanted to just ask about Square Roots production. You connect
Mhm.
folk music from the UK with folk music here.
Yeah, I mean, I was very passionate, as Rob was, about kind of the folk revival.
This is a
you know, through my-
non-for-profit.
Yeah, and I sort of started. I was kind of a very kind lawyer friend of mine said, you know, why didn't you start
Another thing.
Why don't you, if you want to give you this idea, I'll help you set up a charity here, and you could you know, celebrate things, and then you can be a sort of jumping off point. And in fact, we did do something at the Albany State Library in 2017, celebrating Jean Ritchie, whose archive is up there. So it provided a sort of a way in. And we've done some stuff for Square Roots back there with a good colleague of mine who's he's much more interested in English folk music than I am.
Right.
But, you know, all those, I mean, you've had a student who's just got a PhD in all this, haven't you, Addie?
Yeah, I didn't want my
You know,
side.
they
Yeah,
t- you know,
on women
that-
in the folk revival, and it
Yeah,
centers on women in
Those
Grand
folk
songs
Folk.
tell the
revival,
story
right?
of our
Yeah.
history, you
Yeah.
know, and then,
Yeah.
you know, and Dolly Parton does versions of all those
Yep.
Appalachian
Yep.
songs
Yep.
and so on.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a rich, I mean, I'd love to do
Interesting.
more. It's a very rich way, and we will have a proper folk, a real, you know, deep.
Well, the thing
Folk
with
celebration
folk
one year.
music is it's
I love
so organically, it's the soul. It's
Yeah.
so
Right.
so real.
Yeah,
You know, and an expression of what their experiences were at that time.
yeah,
They're like little time capsules in a way.
yeah, they are.
They also paint pictures with the lyrics.
Yes.
So when you
Yes,
listen to
yes.
folk
Yeah,
music, you
yeah.
can actually see it. And when you listen to it now, you remember what you were doing,
Yeah.
who you
Yeah,
were.
yeah,
Simon and
exactly.
Garfunkel had a very big effect on me, as did Joni
Yes.
Mitchell. Those were
Yes.
Mhm.
Joan Baez was your person. Joni
Yeah.
Mitchell was my person.
It was the voice. Well, she was first I heard with the voice, and I still love the voice, and she was a very good guitarist, I have to say.
yeah.
But all those,
Yeah.
you know, the traditional
Yeah.
folk songs,
Yeah.
and then, you know, the Woody Guthrie, you know, all that
Woody
stuff.
Guthrie,
I
yeah.
think we think of it, you know, we draw like this huge amount of material that goes into that folk pot.
Mhm.
You know, the
Yep.
Woody Guthrie songs that really do tell the story of so much, and not just Guthrie, you know, the people before him, and of course Pete Seeger and all this. I mean, and then both of whom inspired Dylan, and Dylan, of course, you know, inspired Simon and Guy, you know, and the rest is kind of
Mhm.
history. But I mean, there's so much, and the links are, you know, I mean, everyone, your school kids here and in the UK knew Barbara Allen. You know, of course,
Yeah.
there are
Yeah.
a zillion
Yeah.
versions.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
You know, and that's part of the fabric. And, you know, Dolly Parton would know another one because she would have learned it in Tennessee, you know.
Right.
It's a
Right.
great connector.
Yeah,
But
It
the
is-
one thing that I think would be fascinating is New York. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Indiana, and coming to New York, everybody around the world knows New York City. They have heard of New York, or they've seen it, or they've visited, or we live here. It's just such an incredible universal spot, you know, or global spot where everybody you can go to the desert in Saudi Arabia or something and mention New York, and they'll be,
And
oh,
they
New
know.
York City.
Yeah.
They know of this town, and the development and how. That's why I'm fascinated with its evolution, which is what you
Mhm.
study, what you
Yeah.
do is the history,
Yeah.
how we got from here, and it grew to this, and then it evolved into that, and it grew into this,
Yeah.
to where we're at now and where we're going.
Yeah.
Right.
And
of course, everyone
I just
knows
find
it
it
from
what
the
you do
movies, rightly or
fascinating.
It is
Fascinating.
fascinating, but I don't think we can talk about what you do or where any of us are going without talking about the pandemic. To me, that was a massive game changer. for
Well, and
New-
that was
yeah.
not the first in New York,
No.
because we had,
Well,
yeah.
well, we
Well,
had
you know,
polio. My
we had-
uncle
we had-
was
well,
part
in
of
Spanish flu.
yeah.
Yeah.
We had
and we had
yeah.
cholera, we had
Right.
Yeah,
smallpox,
right.
we had yellow fever, we had AIDS. I mean, New York City has been hit by medical
Right.
disasters before,
Mm.
but the pandemic in its length and its
Its
Yeah.
length and
is
all
the
the
kind of thing we
places.
haven't seen in a century.
Right.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm working on a book that will collect people's oral histories, poetry,
Wow, that's
first person
amazing.
narratives about the experience of living through this. And it draws on wonderful oral history projects done by people all around the city, at Columbia University, at the New York Public
Amazing.
Library, at Brooklyn College, at all sorts of community groups. And I want to bring all these different voices together in one
Absolutely.
volume
Mhm.
so that people get a sense of what other New Yorkers were living through.
Right.
Because so many of us hunkered down, you had no idea what it was
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have
I'll
a
give
piece
you
by a
one.
Guatemalan delivery man about what it was like to make deliveries during the pandemic.
Wow,
Right.
It wasn't
that's
easy.
interesting.
Right.
And
No.
he was doing that
Yeah.
to provide money so his kids in Guatemala could go to college.
Right.
Wow.
Right? You know, and he's
Right.
getting robbed.
Those
he's
are the
getting
stories.
shortchanged,
Yep.
He's getting
Yep.
his bike stolen.
And if
all
you
these things.
remember,
Wow.
it was the delivery
That's right.
boys that came up with putting the plastic.
Yeah.
They made these big sculptures that
Mhm.
went on their hands, so their
Yeah.
hands wouldn't be freezing as they drove through. It was
Mhm.
unbelievable to me.
Yeah.
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 There were so
Yeah.
many aspects of
Yeah.
it.
We socially went through. That was a new one.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
pandemic.
right.
That
Yeah,
was,
it was-
I
it
didn't
was-
see that one coming.
Right, and it
It's
was-
still kind of hard to believe we were, because I left
Mhm.
New York. In fact, I was here, you know, just it was kind of, and in fact, I think I might have had it, but we didn't realize it was here.
Exactly.
And I was in the
did
hotel,
too.
and I remember, you know, my friends, they said, well, if this gets to Africa and India, they're really going to have a terrible time. Well, guess what? It hit us first, and I
Mhm.
got back to London and was meeting work. And for a long time, the BBC was reporting from Washington Square. You know,
Hmm.
that was their base, which made it
Mhm.
particularly pointed. And it was, I mean, but of course, you know, I suppose Manhattan's a giant liner, really, isn't it? You
Well,
know,
and-
and you couldn't, you know, people. I know a lot of people left the city, but I know a lot of people who absolutely just
I
stayed
would-
there.
I
would
Like
say-
in-
And one
like
thing-
in
and
They had
one-
nowhere to go
London.
to.
And
Yeah,
one
exactly.
thing that is unique about New York is the closeness.
Yes.
Right.
As we are
Yes.
all side by
Yeah, the
side on
liner
the
thing,
subway,
liner
on the
thing,
bus,
yeah.
on the
And
sidewalks.
you know, the people
And
who
we're
couldn't stay home
outside,
in both our
outside.
cities. Yeah.
A lot of times they have houses with front yard and backyard
Yeah.
and garage where they
Yeah.
can get in their car and drive to where they want to
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
And they're not exposed to as many people in one day as what a New Yorker is.
And that, you know, that's the point about the liner thing. You are close together, and of course, as in the UK and every other city,
Mhm.
you know, the delivery guys, the
Yeah.
supermarket
Right.
Yeah.
checkouts, the obviously the medical workers who had no choice. I mean, they had to get through it. And of course, we were clapping for them. And now in the UK,
Mhm.
Right.
yes,
We-
you can,
is
you
what
can
we
starve
did
on your
here.
high prices.
Yeah.
You know, we're through that now.
I couldn't leave. I got sick. They shut New York down March 12th. My whole family and myself were sick on the 16th from an event I had been to in the Village on March 11th. And I couldn't, once I started feeling better, I couldn't leave New York. I have a place in Pennsylvania that I've had for years. Most of my friends that had that all went to their second places. I couldn't leave here. I felt, this is going to sound crazy, I felt like I would be a traitor.
Mhm.
Tim and I and a bunch of our
Mhm.
actor friends hung out. We
We would get
supported.
together about once every 3 months
Yeah.
just to see each other. and-
Right. Actually,
with
Tim,
masks and-
it was more frequent than that. All those dinners, I
Oh,
look
yeah.
back, I kept journals and
Oh,
everything.
okay.
We were getting together actually more than that and
Okay,
finding,
yeah, we had
yeah.
a pod of
We had
friends,
a
yeah, that had all
pod
been
of friends,
tested and-
But I felt if I left New York, I would be abandoning
Yeah.
what was here. And
Mhm.
I don't know, psychically, I felt I would
Yeah.
never get my momentum up again if I left it. I
Yeah.
did not leave here till June of 2020. I first went back to my house then.
And it
so
was hugely
I
scary
couldn't do
and
it.
traumatic.
Mhm. Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
traumatic.
Yeah.
And it really, going back to what we said earlier, it really emphasized the disparity. I mean, one of the first
Yes.
things they
Right.
said in
Yes,
the UK,
absolutely.
our Prime
Absolutely.
Minister, now gone, said,
Yeah, right.
you know, he announced, he said, you know, if you get it, make sure you use a separate bathroom. Well, hello.
Right.
Most people,
What, go
you
down
know,
to the
you may
gas
have a
station in the
guest-
corner?
That's separate.
you may have a guest bathroom, but actually most places, and you know, what about the kids who were sharing, you know,
Mhm.
6 of them sharing a small flat to pay the rent, you know.
Right.
How are you supposed to, you know,
Or families, certain families, everyone lives together.
Yeah.
Grandma, grandpa. I
No,
mean,
this is why it was so hard in
It was so
immigrant
hard.
families, right?
Right.
You had
Yeah.
2 and 3
Yeah.
generations
Yeah, yeah.
under one roof.
telling
So
you.
they could afford to pay the rent.
right.
And they tend to be working in jobs where you had to be exposed to others.
yeah,
Mhm.
so
And
you
that
brought it
brought the
home.
disease back home to
Yeah,
Right.
it was
Mhm.
terrifying.
Right.
It was terrifying.
Well, it is amazing to me that with everything that came down the pike, here we are this year. You've got this festival from the September 10th to September 25th. You made it happen.
Thank
you
We
did.
did.
Yes.
You made it
yeah.
happen. And it's really about moving ahead and doing
Yeah.
your thing no
And
matter
I,
what.
you know, I really hope that we've established this for the long term. It's not a vanity project. I really hope we've established it for the
Mhm.
long term. It
Right.
will indeed happen year after year after year. You know, I'm so thrilled and sort of flattered that people like Robert have come aboard and
Yes.
given very generously of their ideas and time. I mean, people are getting paid to do stuff. No one's getting paid a fortune,
Mhm.
but we're, you know, and it all, you know, it costs money.
But
we
all
gotta
of that
raise money.
input helps
Yeah.
Right, Tim.
to develop the concept and
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
it moving and
Yeah, yeah.
changing and growing.
But you know, we want people to be involved. We want, you know, people like it. So please support it and come along. Support it by coming along. Support it by giving a bit of money if you can. You know, because there's a lot to celebrate here.
Absolutely.
And, we haven't even begun yet. Barely.
Yes,
Right,
you're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Only just
And,
begun.
We've
you
only
can-
just begun their key song. Yeah.
Right.
And you can find out more by going to thevillagetrip.com. Yes.
Yeah.
So, well,
Thank you.
Robert Snyder and Liz Thompson, thank you so
Thank you
very
very
much
much.
and for taking the time
Everyone gets it
to sit down and
Well,
share
thank you
this,
for having
because
us.
we
It was
want to
very fun.
Thank
let people know about it and let people know about what you're doing and just how important history is. It really
Yeah.
is that people study
Gotta
and
keep it
learn
going.
about their
Yeah,
history.
you're
So
right.
thank you very much,
There's that
both
great-
of you, for what you're contributing.
There's that great line in Alan Bennett's play, The History. Am I allowed to swear on this program?
Hell
Yes,
yes.
Hell yeah. There's that great line
swear.
in Alan Bennett, who's a great English writer, played the History Boys, and one of the kids he's teaching said, history is just one fucking thing after another.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, it is, and in many ways it repeats itself. Okay,
Yeah.
but there's
Yeah.
always
Sometimes
like
it's
just a new little thing that happens. It just throws you for a loop. But thank you for doing what you're doing to preserve
Absolutely.
history.
Yes.
And really, you're entertaining New York, and it's about, at the end of the day, you know, entertaining and having something that everybody can go to and enjoy. Thank you so much for
Thank you
that.
guys,
Yes.
and thank you,
both.
thank you,
both.
Rob, for being
Thank you,
part of our
Liz.
little adventure.
Yes,
Happy to be on the
the adventure. I can't
It's
wait.
really a great adventure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. See you.